again, because I have gotten a little toasted in the tent, and I have talked myself into being talkative still. And I sat up. I've been sitting here with my sleeping bag off my body for the most part, like around my feet. But I like to sit with blankets wrapped around my feet in the summer. So in my home, I'll lounge around in the near nude to lie under a blanket. But I'm sitting here and I'm like, I'm weirdly comfortable, like so weirdly comfortable that my hands were sweaty enough that I was like, do I really want to put them in gloves? And so I put them in my lightest gloves. But even sitting here now, my fingertips, they like hurt. They like ache because they're not cold. And so I opened my tent. I was like, well, maybe, because I'm trying to evaluate whether I need to carry my coat. And so I'm trying to describe to you what being homeless is like, and also what living in a tent is like in the winter. And so I realize that I'm talkative about it and that I don't have anything really. I have a lot of key points I'd like to get to, a lot of bullet points, but I don't have anything really to say. And so it doesn't need to be a short. But I do want to talk about this experience because I think that at the end user level, that what you really want to hear about is this stuff. I think you guys don't understand. I don't think you realize that I already recorded my triumphs. I recorded them in shorts while they were happening because I'm doing this as live. I explained that in shorts to begin with. When I became homeless, like I'm documenting my homelessness. And see, I've had a lot of supporters who, when they realized that's what I was doing, and they realized that it was going to require of them to hear my stories, a daily uh, effort to look, because I wasn't going to reach out to them to give them personalized updates, that I wasn't going to treat them like a friend. I was going to treat them like a customer. They all bailed, and I understand that because, like I've said, I actually do understand para relationships in a way that you don't. I went and looked at the research, and so we talk about them in an unfocused kind of way, and that's not what I want to talk about right now. But when I offer you a para relationship, it's because I'm going to talk to you honestly about it. I'm going to communicate it with you. And if you're paying me and telling me that, oh, I'm paying you so you can write, and I'm going, oh, I'm writing every day, here's where it is, and then you don't read it, I am going to say, hey, well, you could know what's going on in my life by reading it. And that's what I'm doing kind of now, is I've been sharing my triumphs, but what I want to share right now is kind of my awe and my wonder. When I open my tent, I can feel that I should be cold. I can feel that I should be cold, that it's cold. I can feel that the temperature outside is cold. It's probably in the 40s. It's been raining all day, and the snow isn't slush and melted off. So it's cold enough that it stayed frozen out there. So it's probably approaching sub-freezing out there. And the reason this is remarkable to me is because if you've been watching these live, I am a person who is just cut through by the cold. I have never been able to resist it. When I first became homeless, my first concern was that I was already 20 pounds underweight because of domestic abuse. My concern was that I needed to put on about 40 pounds, and I needed to put them on fast. And I was right. It got cold fast. I only had about 2 weeks of warm weather. But I accomplished that goal to the point that the last week, I've been really, not the last week, the last month, 4 weeks, I've been like really struggling to eat. Like sometimes I've been going every other day down to Christ's table. But then I get hungry at night. But that's because I got used to only eating right before I went to sleep. And so that meant I got accustomed to eating every other day. And so eating multiple times a day to try to gain that weight. I've put on the maximum amount of weight that my pelvis can carry, to the point that my pelvis is just in pain all the time now. I can't carry any more weight. And so my body is really fighting me with how much I'm eating, especially at night. Because then you wake up, you need to pass that real bad. But what I'm talking about is the benefit behind that, and why I'm doing it is I opened my tent, and I could feel the breeze come in, and I could feel that I had been sweating all night. The inside of my clothes are soaking wet. I mean, they're probably wet to the touch. And the moisture of my breath breathing into the tent, it's going to get trapped up in all of this wool. But what I think about is like how intelligent, how ingenious our ancestors were to look at sheep and go, sheep and goats aren't uncomfortable, and we don't have to kill them to be not uncomfortable in the same way they are. This is going to evaporate out through this shirt, and this shirt will be dry by the time I get to Panera. And that's kind of why I'm sitting here, is because the cold air also makes all this moisture evaporate faster off my body heat. It makes it's really neat. And so I've got my feet in my shoes now, but I open the thing and my feet are wet. I mean, my feet are legitimately wet. My socks are soaking wet. But I let the air hit my feet, and my feet were toasty warm, and they remained toasty warm. And I'm like, wow. First of all, those women's socks that I put on they're cotton lined on the inside. They're warm as shit. They're stretchy and they're comfortable. They rub against my toenails because they've got a seam that runs right across the toe for some reason. But women's clothes in general are extremely unuser friendly, and they blame men, but women, y'all have been bitching about it long enough. And anyway, I know enough about the history of women's fashion to know that it was women designing those clothes that you find so uncomfortable. Women and gay men. It was not straight men designing that stuff. And so anyway, I'm still sitting here wondering, like, man, is it even a good idea to put on my coat? Because I'm sitting here drying off, and that was the point. And like my calves and my feet, they're starting to get cold now. Oh, they're in my boots now. My feet are in my boots. Yeah, my shoes are in my feet. My shoes are on my feet now, but it's just remarkable how even having these mints, even having these candies, just having some amount of carbohydrate for my body to burn keeps my internal temperature up. And so the reason, like, when you look at old Viking dudes, and like guys who are acclimated to this weather, and they got these pot bellies, and they look like they're overweight, and then you guys always make fun of the dudes who wear t-shirts and shorts outside, but you never, and we used to make fun that they were always fat dudes. We used to make fun of them for being fat. Not we, I didn't participate in it, but people, when I was a young person, I include myself in my community. I think you should too. They were made fun of it. They made fun of for it. They've always been made fun of for it. But the reason they can do that is because all of that body fat continues to the body just continuously is burning it. And so while they're outside, the body is able to ramp up its production of body heat. And so their legs and their arms aren't cold. It's really cool. It's really remarkable. They aren't cold. I am not cold. My body is starting to go into the hyperthermic, like we're going to do the micro shivers and stuff, because yeah, my body is aware that the cold is pressing in on it, and so it does have to push out. And so those micro shivers are just, they're keeping the blood heated with friction along that pathway, and it's just so fucking awesome. And so, I am not a creationist, but I can I can relate to creationists because of their awe. They don't know that they're in awe. They're in awe of the systems. And so they're giving that awe up to their God, and then they're giving their God the credit instead of for the mechanism, for the end result. And either approach is fine. But I find the mechanistic approach to awe much more interesting, and you're going to go in my pocket soon. You know how this goes if you've been watching these. And so idiomatically, the phrase, the idiom, mechanistic approach to awe should bring you to think, well, that must be why he's doing this. His mechanistic approach to awe. And that's close. I'm not trying to engineer or machine for myself awe. I'm not trying to replicate awe. I prefer, between the naturalists, the mechanists, and the creationists, I prefer the mechanist argument. If I have to talk to someone over a long period of time, or I have to listen to someone speak over a long period of time, I prefer the naturalist. I prefer the mechanist, because the naturalist and the mechanist will tolerate me for longer, on average. And that's how the mechanist and the naturalist has won converts over the past 400 years. Is by being more tolerant. Still trying to proselytize, still trying to change your approach. And that's like, that reminds me of that guy, I don't remember his name now, that the first guy that I made an at short to, bitching at me, that I wouldn't adequately respond to his critique. So I made a video that he didn't respond to, telling me that he hoped at the end of his diatribe, telling me how wrong I was, but how tolerant he was of my being wrong, demonstrated by how willing he was to tell me how wrong I was and articulate it to me, how wrong I was, that on its own right should merit him consideration for a convert, that by its own right, he hoped, would influence me to consider changing my mind in favor of his opinion. And this is the bias. I mean, this is why they engage. This is why he threw himself into my DMs, is because he wanted to win for himself a convert. Because I keep telling you guys, it's so funny, because like the Christians will say it outright, but they say it in these hyper glorified crusader warrior type terms that are just laughable if you're not in the room with him. And the only reason nobody in the room laughs with him is because they're doing their absolute best to take him as absolutely seriously as possible, because he's their pastor. And on some level, they're paying him to say these things. And they know and understand that. And so I know and understand that on some level, YouTube is monitoring what I'm saying and is doing its very best to keep me from getting myself banned. I respect that, in fact. That's why they don't push my work when I get to talking about the things I do. Okay, I think I have everything I need. I'm starting to get anxious. So, let's get this. Ah, shit. That's what I thought. Oh, well, these don't need to come with me. Yeah, these can stay. Give me a second. I gotta concentrate for just a moment. Okay. I gotta put you in my pocket. I need both of my hands. I'm not gonna remember exactly what I was talking about, but exactly what I was talking about is largely irrelevant. And that, I do that and I let that happen and I get myself into a position where I do that and I acknowledge that it has happened. To give you, it's actually not to give myself anything. It's to give you an opening. Oof! It's to give you an opening to remind me that I never finished talking about a thing in the comments, so that I can just make a video with that and I can thank you for it directly in the video that I make on the subject, because I don't prefer to be combative. I don't think I've had to be combative since I told that guy off. That series of people off. I haven't had to be combative since the last time I outright asked for money because I went through a tragedy. So I haven't had to be combative since the last time I went through a tragedy. Imagine if people responded to the people in LA, the way they respond to me. Well, your house is on fire because you chose to live in California. Wow. 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 What I want to talk about is my approach to awe and wonder. I prefer to take an experiential approach, because the natural and materialist approach, it can only get you so far, and it can only get you through what you can read. It can only get you to and through what you can read. So if you can read about it, then you can make naturalist or mechanist reproductions of it. You can make a museum and you can show what we can know. And in that way you can be faithless in your approach and you can make a creationist museum. Oof. Okay, here we go. Every time I see this, the deer struggle up this hill in the morning too. It's a very steep hill. It is a truly steep hill. For example, there is a, I don't know what you would call it. There's a nature-y town here in Ohio called Yellow Springs, I think. And you can go there and you can camp and you can hike the hills and you can be out in the woods. And there's a famous spot out there that's actually not a lot unlike my original spot. My original spot made me think of this spot in Yellow Springs, and that's why I chose to do what I'm doing now, which is really more hermitage than homelessness. I'm a hermit, not homeless. But see, if you had read Walden, if you had read Henry David Thoreau, and I don't think that's who wrote Walden, but if you had read Walden, you would understand what I'm doing. Especially if you were a naturalist or a mechanist. You would begin to be able to replicate, repeat. You'd be able to begin to machine. But see, you don't actually have any experience in machining. See, I grew up in machining. And so when I hear mechanic, right? I think of my dad. My dad was a mechanical engineer. Well, what did my dad do? My dad took ideas, he put them into a CAD, drew them up in CAD, took that CAD program, wrote it into a machine, and then what did those machines do? They made infinite replicas of that idea. And that's the mechanist worldview. And so it's just interesting to me that these people with a mechanist worldview don't try to do that for me. They don't try to take what I'm saying, take who I am, take what I'm doing, take how I represent myself, and then machine it into replicas so that they can then model it. And what I'm talking about is modeling it in their mind so they can understand it. That's Plato, y'all. That's Aristotle. That's all they were talking about. That's all they were talking about. That's all philosophy of mind was before William James. That's why all philosophers are footnotes to Plato. They're just trying to explain what Plato says and how they understand it. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that out. And so anyway, there's this spot in Yellow Springs that a guy in the way back, an American, white guy, so sometime between now and, what was it, the 1500s, 1492, right? 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, isn't that right? So sometime after 1492, but before 2017 or 18, when I was there was this there was this guy who just decided that he didn't want to be a part of it anymore, and he was going to go be a hermit and live under this rock. And he lived under this fucking awesome, down in this ravine. He lived in this awesome cave that had a waterfall and everything. It's just utterly beautiful. It's a tourist trap now. People go in there and they take pictures and they're like, oh, look, I live with this hermit. I'm where this hermit used to live. Ah! Well, anyway, I went down in there and I started thinking, like, well, what would it require to live down here? What would it actually require to survive these winters? Because we were there, I want to say we were there in the early fall, and it was cold. It was cold because it's wet, because there's that waterfall, so there's just this mist that permanently fills the air. So I'm thinking, all right, well, you got to deal with a lot of wet. And so if you're a hermit, how are you dealing with your clothes mildewing? How are you keeping your skins from rotting off of your body? Right? I'm thinking in these terms, like, what are you doing for clothes? If you're totally, because this guy was completely removed from civilization. There was not a town in the area when he was there. He said, fuck it, I'm gonna go live out in BFE where nobody can bother me. Nobody can tell me that I'm not allowed to say fuck when I feel compelled to say fuck, for example. And the point is, I could only replicate his experience so far with the materialist worldview, with the mechanist approach to understanding. I could only get so far. And so while I prefer it to the magical, creationist, monist approach, that doesn't mean I think it's the best one. Not supposed to look at girls like that, boys. Anyway. Distracting. That's actually, I let that happen because that's actually, I like to do this. Point out that it's distracting, and then that's what the definition of distracted was. You couldn't stop looking at her when you were supposed to be doing other things. And now the diagnosis of distracted type depression was a real thing. Boys and girls they couldn't focus because they were so in love with somebody who didn't know they existed. Real thing. Still happens. In fact, I was talking about music, and there's a lot of music about that. There are a lot of girls who write about letting a boy cheat on their girlfriend with them, and then he never calls them back. And now they're just pining after him for the rest of their lives. And it's like, man, with all these songs, that was the point I was kind of trying to make. But I was trying also to leave the subtext is, man, all these songs out there and y'all keeps making the same decisions as these girls. It's like you take a monist approach. It's like you don't even know that you take a fate approach. A fatalist approach, in fact. That what will happen, and nothing you do, nothing that you see, nothing that you learn is going to change that. And it's like, man, if you have that song and it's a talisman to you, and you love it so much and you listen to it so much and you remind yourself of that so much, it's to remind yourself not to repeat that mistake, y'all. Not because you like the song, not because the song spoke to you. It's because your brain is telling you, do not repeat this mistake. And that is why I choose hermitage, that you might call homelessness. That is why I choose to be vagrant. That's why I choose my work to be here on the internet. That's why I choose to be available and to be not really scouring, but to be keeping my eye open on the internet. That's why. That's the why. That's the real why. I can't be vigilant if I'm distracted with a job. And if I have these thoughts, if I have a thought like today, like I have a chain of thoughts that just needs to come out of me, needs to come out, and I have them while I'm standing there at work, I can't record them. And then I get home and they're gone. Oh, I can't remember what I was thinking about. And you might think, well, take notes. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't work that way. I made 3, I tried that. I know it doesn't work that way, but I wanted to see if I had improved it all. And so there were 3 videos that I did yesterday, 3 of my shorts that I did yesterday that were topics that I had been thinking about when my phone was too dead to record. So I just took the note down in my phone, and I think they were 3 of my worst and most unfocused videos. I really struggled with trying to get the point across, because in my head I got the point across in 3 minutes, and I was sufficient with that, and then I couldn't remember how I got there. I couldn't remember how I got to where I ended. I could remember my beginning and I could remember my end, but I couldn't remember how I got there. And for me, it's like, it's not the same at all, but you could imagine it like if Odell Beckham spent the rest of his career trying to replicate that one-hand catch. If that's all he thought about for the rest of his career, Odell Beckham Jr. was trying to replicate that catch his rookie year. It's just not worth it. You can't get better. And in fact, he did himself a disservice by trying to outdo himself that season instead of just playing the game. So I think he's still unemployed, even with the playoffs happening. He wasn't able to find work. Now that might have been a health-related issue, but health-related issues are about the same thing. It's about not being focused on the right stuff. Not being able to get your body right. And I can tell you this right now, my leg hurts so bad. That's why I'm thinking about it and why I'm saying it. I'm just being honest from my perspective. Experiential rather than a thought experiment. It hurts in large part because of my activity. I'm the one who chose to carry these 2 books and these full bottles of water around, man. I'm carrying, this bag's heavy now. It's heavy enough that when I went to pick it up yesterday, I just went to like casually pick it up. It didn't lift. And I was like, oh, I got to be careful slinging this around or I'm going to rip the straps. Like it's heavy now. And that's just, first of all, it's a consequence of eating as much as I do and getting fit to the degree that I am. But a lot of the pain that I'm feeling is just like habitual behaviors that I just won't stop. Like shortness of breath, lungs and chest and throat hurting. Well, yeah, you smoke way more than you really need to. Stress convinces me that I'll just fight through it. And, being a man, especially a man in the era that I grew up, man, the way I grew up was just rub dirt in it. Rub dirt in it and wait until you're old enough to drink your way through the pain, and then eventually you'll die. And then we've just gotten so much better at living, at being alive, but we haven't gotten better at living. You see what I'm saying? We live longer. Jesus Christ, that was a wide turn. We live for longer, but we don't do it better. That's why my generation is freaking the fuck out. We're looking at living to 100 years old in poverty and debt, and we're like, what's the fucking point in that? I heard a guy on the bus say that. He was in his 60s, and one of the women also in her 60s goes, hey, you know, they expect us to live until we're in our 120s. He goes, oh, fucking great, I'll get to retire at 100, and I'll finally fucking die at 101. He's right though, but they were talking about a buddy of his. He was talking about a buddy of his who had never had any kind of health problems. Now, the way he put it is never been to the hospital, but in that guy's mind had never hurt badly enough to need to go to the hospital. And he goes, man, my buddy's been retired for 5 years, and all he's done is been in and out of the hospital since the day he got retired. And it's like, yeah, well, the day you got retired, my dad said this to me. My dad is in a bad way in his health, and he's in that same age group. He's 18 or 19 years older than I am. I'm 37. That puts him right squarely at 55. And yeah, he's been forced out of work because of his health. And now the younger generation is saying that's because he didn't get anything treated, and that's because, right, we were just told to rub dirt on it. If it didn't hurt bad enough that you couldn't stand on it, it wasn't broken. That's why I have a misshapen hand and a totally broken clavicle. It doesn't hurt bad enough that you can't use it. It doesn't hurt bad enough that we have to stop what we're doing to go to the hospital. And in that way, I keep leaving it open to you guys to ask me why my depression doesn't matter to me. And it doesn't matter to me because it can't get in the way of me making the money that I need to survive. The depression can't get between me and being alive anymore.